Okay, thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. In this course of our learning, we should have the base of Mikdash. Everyone should be well. So, fortunately, for my father. Okay, today we're going to start from Tanu Rabbanon. Lo Yachal Zarei. It's right in the middle of the page of Ayin Zayin. Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Tanu Rabbanon. Is that correct? Naftali? I think so. I think we're at Tanu Rabbanon. We did Rib the Star yesterday. Tanu Rabbanon was taught in a brisa. We're talking about the concept of a chalala or a chalal. Chalal is when there's a disqualified Kohen. Any Kohen that his children should have been Kohenim, right? A Kohen, father's a Kohen, the son should be a Kohen. But if he marries a woman that he wasn't allowed to marry, the child from that is a chalal, disqualified. So it says, Lo Yachal Zari. He should not make his children halalim. Yeah. Okay. So, Ainli Alazari. I would only know that the children themselves are halalim. He atzma minayin. See that? You see what we're up to in the. Should I show you the place? Yeah. He atzma minayin. How do I know? How do I know that the woman herself becomes a halala from that union with this man, with the kayin? The woman is prohibited to marry a kayin. Let's say she's a divorcee or something. How do I know that she becomes now a halala? That would mean that now she can't eat truma if her father was a Kohen. Usually when a woman's father's a Kohen. So when if she's married to a Kohen, she eats truma when she's married. When she gets divorced, so she goes back to her father's house. But if she's invalidated for some reason, then she can't eat truma. So how do I know that she becomes a halala? Amrit kal v'chaymer. So it says we have a kal v'chaymer ma'azarish le'avar avera. If the children that did nothing wrong mischalal and they become halala, the halalim, he shavra avera. But the woman that committed a sin, ain't it didn't she mischalal? Then for sure she should become a halala. Okay, it's a good kal v'chaymer. Gemara says, but hu atzma yechiach. 1 second, I have a kasha on the kal v'chaymer. It's all if the factor that makes a person a halala is the sin. Let's take a look at the man. Does the man become a halal when he lives with this woman? No. Even though he's doing the avera, vein mischalal, he doesn't become a halal. Now the truth is that we don't allow him to do the service in the temple while he's married to this woman that he's prohibited to. But we do allow him to divorce the woman and make a vow that he's not going to do that again, and then come back and do the service in the temple. So he doesn't become a chalal. But you want to tell me that the woman does because she did a sin, but it's not fair. The man didn't become a chalal. Maybe the woman shouldn't become a chalal. Chalala. The Gemara says, Malahu, that's not a kasha, because when you talk about the man, he never becomes a chalal. Even if the man would live with a non-Jewish woman, the Kohen lives with a non-Jewish woman, he doesn't become defiled. He can still go back and do the service later. He did a sin, but it doesn't change his status. On the other hand, this woman, if she lives with a non-Jewish man, she does become a chalal. When you talk about the woman, she always becomes a chalal. So you can't ask me a kasha on the kal v'chaymer that for sure she should become a halala if her children become. The children did not. What's the kal v'chaymer? Kal v'chaymer is if the children that did nothing wrong become halalim, the mother that did the sin for sure should become a halala. So he said, 1 second, what about the father did the sin? He doesn't become a halal. So that's not a kasha. The father never becomes a halal. Okay. So the kal v'chaymer seems good. And if you want to say, I have a pasuk that says that you shouldn't profane or you make the children into chalalim. And the pasuk can teach me that you shouldn't make someone that used to be kosher into a chalal, which means that the woman that used to be kosher, you should not have the relations with her to make her into a chalal. The kohen should not make her into a chalal. That means that the children themselves were never kosher because they didn't exist beforehand. So lo yechalal is coming to tell me that you shouldn't make someone that used to be kosher into a chalal, which means the woman. That tells me that she becomes a chalal. We're asking if the forbidden marriage, kohen with someone that he can't marry, the children become halalim. What about the woman? So we had a kal v'chaimer, and then we had a pasuk. So the Gemara says now, Mayim nafshach leimer. Why did you have to say? And if you would like to say you don't want to accept the kal v'chaimer, then I'll give you a pasuk. Maybe there's a problem with the kal v'chaimer. Let's say like this. What was the kal v'chaimer? If the children that did nothing wrong become halalim, so the woman that did the aveira, for sure she should become a halalim. So you can ask a kasha on that. You can say that the children are halalim because their whole existence was through an aveira. But the woman, her existence isn't through an aveira. She existed before she did the aveira. Maybe she shouldn't become a halalim. So that's why we have the pasuk to tell us that she does become a halala. In case you're going to get rid of the kal v'chaimer with that kasha, they'll tell you that we have a source for it. Taner Rabbanan, start in a brisa. Who's considered a halala? So, right, someone that's not fit to marry a kohen, and also someone that can't eat truma if they want to return to the father's house or something. Kol shenolda min apsulim. Anyone that was born from people that were pasul. Maybe it means from a prohibited relations. My psulim, what does it mean? Someone that was pasul, someone that was invalid. Ilem psulim loy. If you want to say anyone that was forbidden to the husband or the father, if the husband has a relations with someone that's prohibited to him, the child is a chala. That would be if he's a kohen. If he's a kohen, he becomes a disqualified kohen, right? Because he married someone that he wasn't allowed to marry. Say, 1 second. If any person that is disqualified has a child, so then that's going to be a chalal. Hari machzir gerushasai depsulaloi, but now ksherim. Shiv tayevehi tayevevein b'na tayevim. Okay, now, what we're talking about over here is that if a Yisrael, we switch the scenario. If we're asking if any prohibited marriage creates a chalal, anyone that's prohibited. So if that's the case, then what about if a man marries a woman, divorces her, she marries someone else, divorces him, comes back to the first husband, marries the first husband? That's a prohibition. You're not allowed to be machzer gerushasei lacher shnisas lacher. You can't remarry a divorced wife after she's been married to someone else. But we have a rule that the children from that relations, from that union, are not mamzerim.
Which second, first husband?
It's the same husband.
She's married somebody else in between.
Yeah, forget the middle guy. The middle guy is nothing. But she goes back to the first husband. So it says that it's disgusting. The Torah says it's a tayeva, but the relations is a tayeva, but the children are not. Okay, so why are you telling me that they're halalim? We learned from the pasuk that there's nothing wrong with them. Rav Yehuda says hachi kamra. We didn't mean to say that any prohibited marriage creates halalim. You know, meant to say, Ezu halala, what's a halala? Kol shenolda min psul kahuna. It has to be only someone that's prohibited to a Kohen. Now the Gemara says, nolda in, loy nolda loy. The Brisa says only someone that was born from the prohibited marriage, but not someone that was not born from that. But what about Hare Almana Grusha Zaina Deloy Nolda Kahavi Halala? You told me that the wife in that marriage becomes a halala as well. If the Kohen marries a divorcee, she becomes a halala. And it's not noilad from the psulim. It's not born from this marriage. And the same applies to a widow, the divorcee, or a zaina. A zaina is a machlekes. I forget where in Ksubas. I think we had it. Maybe it's going to be over here. Sorry. The zaina is someone. There's different translations of the zaina. I mean, a zaina could be a married woman that lives with a man, but and someone else. That's a zaina. A zaina could be any woman, according to one of the opinions, any woman that would agree to be with any man. It never says no. Zaina, the strict opinion is a zaina is any woman that's with a man that she's not married to. That's the strict opinion.
Quick question.
Yeah.
With respect to remarriage after subsequent marriage, married, divorced, married, and want to marry again, does it apply only if it's the woman who remarries, or is it also if the man remarries?
The man doesn't have that rule, but he can't marry his ex. He can't if she's remarried. If he marries someone else, he can marry. And she was single. He can marry her back.
He can come back to her. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can see someone saying that this is not fair. The men have rights to do a lot more than they don't get. They don't lose the status, when they live with a non-Jewish woman.
Right.
And when the woman does, she loses her status. Okay. I'm not rewriting the Bible.
What's wrong with being a halala? What do you lose?
But being a halala can't marry a Kohen. In certain instances, it affects the children as well. Like a halal's daughter can't marry a Kohen either.
So if wants to marry Cohen, there's plenty of fish in the sea.
Yeah, but when it turns out that that's an older single girl that has a difficult time finding a shidduch, finally she finds a guy that's name is Katz or Cohen, and you say if this doesn't, but they've been dating for 4 years, you say that she can't get married. It's complicated.
That's the only trick.
That's a problem. Then there's one other issue. The other issue is that she can't eat truma, even if her family is Kohanim. She goes to her family dinners, and the whole family is eating truma dinner.
Sardines.
The whole family, because they're all Kohanim, she can't eat with them.
That's the role.
There was an interesting tshuva from Rabbi Yisraeli.
Shol Yisraeli.
Yeah, a woman never been married and was a surrogate mother. Okay, and afterwards, Baruch Hashem, she meets a man, but he's a Kohen.
Oh. Uh-huh. My guess is that he allowed it.
Yeah, his tshuva was very interesting. It was like 2 lines allowing it, and then 8 pages about why this shouldn't be done.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But he did allow it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
He allowed it because
it was a surrogate mother. It wasn't with. It was just implanted, right? That was the reason. Okay.
It's hard also for older Kohanim if that balances things out in any way.
Oh, the problem is the older Kohanim as well. How do they find a shidduch if so many women are disqualified? Right, that's a good point.
I was listening to a lesson about today's Daf, and it introduced a term that I'd never heard before. It said there are some poskim that are more lenient today because it drew a distinction between Kohen Vadai and Kohen Suffolk.
Uh-huh.
And it said all Kohanim today are in the status of a Suffolk Kohen.
Uh-huh.
And on that basis would accept certain leniencies. Have you ever heard that phrase before? That concept?
I've heard the concept that if someone doesn't have a real tradition that he's a Kohen, so he can challenge that assumption that was told to him by his father, his grandfather, that weren't religious.
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, they weren't religious. You can't trust them anyway, and he can challenge that. Yeah, but that would be because they don't because it has to do with the fatherhood.
I'm not sure. I don't know what you do. The fan base verified.
And you could be lenient.
Kind of got limited jobs.
And you could be lenient because of that, or you have to take all the stringencies.
I think the limited one. I think that the unverified fan wanted to be Kohen. So they didn't necessarily take any leniencies.
Right, because in those days the Kohen had benefits.
They weren't necessarily given all the jobs.
Avram Nosson saying the Rambam speaks about it.
They need a blue check mark.
They need a blue check next to their name to get to be a verified Kohen.
Well, Avram Nosson, I heard in this lecture that it used to be talking about a long time ago, the Kohanim had documentation. And when that documentation was lost, every Kohen since then is in the status of a Suffolk Kohen.
Well, I would assume that today, like that's all he's saying, that nobody is equally, very few people are verified. I would assume that makes sense. But it's not a new concept. It was out there 1,000 years ago. That problem existed 2,000 years ago too. It's a lesser extent problem.
What if you have the Kohen gene?
Well, I don't think Torah believes in genetics, whatever that's worth.
Okay. So we're asking a question that, according to the Brisa, only someone that I'm sorry. Oh, really? Yeah, the Kohen gene won't make a person a Kohen because it could be his a halal. Yeah. Okay. So we have a brisa that says a halal or a halal is only someone that's born from a forbidden marriage, and then we're saying that the wife is becomes a halala. Amarabba hachi kamar. Is a halala muskeres. What is the mentioned halala shleis l'shasakesha klal? Someone that never had any time that they were kosher. They were always a halal. Who is that? That would be someone that was born from a union that was forbidden to a Kohen. My muskeres, what are you talking about when you said that what was the mentioned halala? What is a halala that it's clear in the Torah that doesn't need the rabbinic interpretation to come in and explain it? That is kol shenaldamim sulikuna. That's talking about someone that was born from someone that was forbidden to a Kohen, and that's excluding the woman that's part of that forbidden union. That we need a pasuk that comes in to teach me that. We had the kavachayim, and then we had the pasuk. We said lo yichul zeh, lo yichal zari, lo yichul zeh sheyakasher b'neschala. I needed a rabbinic interpretation for that pasuk to teach me that she also becomes a kohen. We're looking for who's a halal. We're looking for someone that's a halal without any interpretation, just clear from the pasuk. Okay. Taner Rabbanan, start in a brisa. Almana. The Gemara is going to discuss what's going on over here, but apparently there were 3 sins. Kohen Gadol marries a widow, he marries a widow, and he marries a widow. He's only chayav once. We'll have to explain this in a moment. Grusha. If a regular Kohen marries a divorcee, and a divorcee, Ein chayav alachas, he's only chayav once. Almana grusha v'chalala zaina. Let's say he marries 4 women. That's what it looks like. We'll see in a moment that not necessarily the case. A widow, a divorcee, a chalala and a zaina. So, Bisman Shem Kaseder, if it's in order, then chayav al kalachas v'achas. Then he's chayav on each one. However, Zinsav and Eschalav and Eskarshav and Esalma here, it becomes very clear that we're dealing with one woman. It was a woman that was, originally she was a widow. Then she got married again and she was a divorcee. Then she was a chalala. And then chalala must have meant that she got married to a Kohen after being a divorcee. Then she becomes a zaina. That means, right, all else fails. So then comes along our Kayan and lives with her. So if it was in order, Almana, Grusha, V'chalala, Zaina, then that man is chayav 4 times, right? But if it's the other way, if you start her off as a Zaina, then she becomes Nischala, then she gets divorced, and then she becomes a widow, so in a chayav alachas. It's only chayav once. The man, the Kayan that now comes along and lives with this woman, is only chayav once. There's a lot of marriages.
It doesn't get enough service from the marriages without
this Cohen.
what chayav. So what's his reward for
Part of her book. In her book, she wants to have as many complications.
No, but what does he get for being
What is he chayav?
for having violated?
I think he has to bring a korban for each one, right? I think it's a korban. Maybe it's malchus, and the kids have a problem. But yeah, but when you say chayav for each one, you're talking about some sort of punishment. They're all negative prohibitions, so it would be malchus for each one. Maybe a korban as well. Okay, now the Gemara says Amar Mar. We go back to analyze. What did you mean when you said almana, almana, almana 3 times a widow? Ein chayav alachas, you only chayav once. Hi almana hechidami. What's the case of the widow? Are we talking about a Kohen that goes around and he lives with Ruvain's widow, he lives with Shimon's widow, and he lives with Levi's widow? We're talking about a Kohen Gadol here, not just a Kohen, because a Kohen is allowed to marry a widow. Yeah, I'm gonna see later that the prohibition is either the marriage or the prohibition is the relations with the people that are forbidden to a Kohen. There's a discussion between Abaye and Rava and the Gemara later. Is it the prohibited marriage or prohibited relations? Or is it a prohibited marriage that leads to relations? Or is it, let's say they never get married. I mean, it's a little bit unclear, but I think if they never get married, I think it's prohibited as well. Yeah. That's a good question. If there was a Kohen, if there's a Kohen that's going to marry this divorcee, is it better for them just not to get married? And then, and just live together? Or does it not matter? Or is it exactly the same thing? Or is it, that's something we should look into, but hopefully it'll never be relevant. Okay. So if we're talking about that, it's all of these people, all of these widows, the widow of Reuven, the widow of Shimon, the widow of Levi. Why is he only chayav once? Hooray, we're on top of 77. Hooray, Gufin Mechulakim, Hooray, Shemus Mechulakim. These are different people, these are different names associated with them. Reuven's widow, Shimon's widow, Levi. That should be 3 different sins for sure. There should be 3 different punishments. You should get malchus on each one. Ella Shabal Almana Achas Shalish Bias. Rather, we're talking about that it was he lived with a widow 3 times. 3 relations. He's only chayav once. When it says Hechidami, what's the case? Maybe they only warned him once. In order to get a punishment, you have to be warned. If they so pshita de chayav alachas. Obviously, he's only chayav once. He was only warned once. Ela daser be'akol chada v'chada. Must be that they warned them on each one. We're looking for a chiddush here. Must be that they warned them each time. So Amayin chayav alachas. Then why is he not chayav more than once? But Tanan, we have a Mishnah that says Nazir sheyeshesi yayin kol yom kulin. Let's say you have a Nazir that's drinking wine the entire day. A Nazir is not allowed to drink wine. And here he goes ahead, he takes a cup of wine, he drinks the whole day, he's drinking wine. In a chayav alachas. He's only chayav once. Amalei al tishta. So they tell him, don't drink each time. And he takes another sip. Chayav al kalachas rachas. He's chayav on each and every one. Okay. So here also, if they warned him every relations that he has, he should be chayav for each one. This leitzricha shabal almanas Reuven sheis almanas Shimon sheis almanas Levi. This, I think they call this a black widow. He lives with one woman. That this was Reuven's widow. Then she married Shimon and he died. Then she married Levi and he died. So she's a widow 3 times. And you're really not supposed to get married after that, right? After twice even, I think it's called katlanis. We hold the chazaka as 2 times when it comes to death. So, but maybe they were a widow for other reasons. If it's accidents, then we don't say that it's a katlanis. So then she goes ahead and she marries this Kohen Gadol. Could have thought that maybe that it's all different names because she was a widow from different people. But in order to get different prohibitions, it needs to be from different bodies as well. And this is all one body. It's all one person, right? Even though she was widowed 3 times. Now that's very difficult to be widowed 3 times from the same man. We're talking about she was widowed from Reuven, and she was widowed from Shimon, and she was widowed from Levi.
So she marries each one.
She marries each one. Each one dies. Yeah.
Are they wealthy? Is she an agent? That's the assumption.
I read from my brother-in-law showed me a book by Lord Jacobowitz, the chief rabbi of England. He had like a medical book. He must have had a medical background. Anyway, in there he had he was trying to describe the disease that the katlanis, the woman that her husbands die, why she can't marry again. So she says he knows what the disease is, and it would basically kill just their husband. It was like some sort of infection or something. So, okay, so that's why she's only chayav once. The husband is only chayav once for living with her because it's not separate people. Almana grusha v'chalal zayin. We're continuing to explain the brisa. When it says almana grusha v'chalal zayin, hi tana my kasaver. What does the tana hold? Ikasaver yisachalal liser. We said that if this woman has a whole bunch of different prohibitions on her because she's a widow and she's a divorcee and she's a halala and she's a zaina. So if he holds Isser Chalal Isser, that meant that prohibitions are stackable, that if one thing is prohibited, a case of this would be eating treif on Yom Kippur. Is that 2 prohibitions or is it 1 prohibition? Or is it because it was already prohibited before? Do we say that now it's okay, now you did 2 sins, or no, do you say that it's just 1? So do we hold that does this Tana hold that the prohibitions are stackable? So then why is it only in one way? Why is it only almana grusha v'chalal zaina? Well, let's say it's zaina chalal grusha almana. Then it would also be the same amount, 4 prohibitions. Because of Reinis Chalas reveals that they're not stackable. I feel like say there's an amilai. Even if it's in this order, it also shouldn't be a problem. It should be just 1. Amar Rava. Rava explains Haitan Isser Chalal Isser Leslie. He doesn't hold that prohibitions are stackable unless Isser Meisif Islay, unless each prohibition includes something that wasn't in the first prohibition. So it has to overlap over something else. So it would work like this. Gemara spells it out. Almana, when she's a widow, first time, she's married to Reuven, she's a widow. So, Asura l'kayin gadol. She can't marry the Kohen Gadol. V'shaya l'kayin hedyot, but she can still marry a Kohen hedyot because a widow can marry a Kohen. not a Kohen Gadol, but a Kohen. Havale Grusha, and now she marries Levi, and Levi divorces her. Now she's a divorcee. So now she has a new prohibition, prohibited not only to the Kohen Gadol, but now she's also prohibited to other Kohanim as well. So because that prohibition extended to more than what the first prohibition has, so because it includes that, Migudi Taisif Leisur Lagabi Kohen Hedyot, Taisif Leisur Lagabi Kohen Gadol. So because it adds a prohibition to the Kohen Hedyot, it also adds to the Kohen Gadol. Now, when the Kohen Gadol lives with her, not only is there a prohibition of a widow, but there's also a prohibition of being a divorcee. But she could still eat Shuma. So when the Kohen marries her, she becomes a Chalala, which we said was not only the children become Chalalim, but even the wife becomes a Chalala, right? We had a Kal V'chaimer. If the children did nothing wrong, they become Chalalim. So the wife for sure becomes, she committed the sin, she becomes a Chalala. And then she can't eat Truma. But once she can't eat Truma, once it's coming to tell me another law, so that law also goes back and tells me that the Kohen Gadol has another new prohibition on it. So now the Kohen Gadol has 3 prohibitions. What is the Zaina? How does she have that? How does that add to anything? Since in a regular case, what would happen if a woman became a Zaina? She wouldn't be allowed to be with her husband. If she was a married woman that lived with another man willingly, she couldn't go back to her husband. So since the concept of a Zaina does normally add an extra prohibition, so too over here we're going to say that there is an extra prohibition that's being added by the Zaina, even though it's not actually, it's just in language, the Zaina would prohibit another person. So therefore it also adds on to the Kohen Gadol another prohibition. Yeah, the Mefarshim ask why it didn't just say a case that she's a Zaina. Why didn't it just say that she was married to a man and she lived with someone else, and now she's prohibited to the husband. So just like she's prohibited to the husband, so now she's also prohibited to the Kohen Gadol as a Zaina. We added on one more person that she's prohibited. Every time you add on another person that she's prohibited to, then it should add on a new prohibition to the Kohen Gadol as well. More inclusive. Anything that's more inclusive. Tani Tana Kamei Rav Sheshis. There was a Tana that was teaching in front of Rav Sheshis. The Tana means not that he was from the Mishnah, because Rav Sheshis was not a Tana in the time of the Mishnayos. Tana means that he was someone that memorized brises, and he was like the library for the yeshiva. So he had a good memory, and he memorized these brises, and he would recite them. And Rav Sheshis, who was the teacher, would analyze them. So this Tana taught, Kol shehu b'yikach or b'layikach. Anyone that could be married has the prohibition of don't marry if they're prohibited to get married, but it has to be possible to marry. Kol sheni, you'll see in a moment. Kol sheni b'yikach, anyone that's not possible to marry, ena b'layikach, doesn't have the prohibition of don't marry. Well, what do you mean to say? Prat l'kayin gadol shebal achayse almana. Let's say a Kohen Gadol lives with his sister that's a widow. Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. So the prohibition of him marrying a widow only applies if he could have married the widow. But since over here it's his sister, in which that's not even considered a marriage. If he marries his sister, it's considered nothing. So then we don't say that he prohibited that he violated the prohibition of marrying a widow. Right? Amalei Damalachmani. Shesha says to the Tana, who told this to you? Like, in other words, what's your source for this? It's Reb Shimon. The Amar, Reb Shimon says, he says that prohibitions aren't stackable. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. Reb Shimon says, someone eats non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur. It's nevela, wasn't slaughtered. Pater, he's exempt from kares. Eating on Yom Kippur is kares. It's a very strict punishment. Eating non-kosher meat is non-kosher meat. It's lashes, but it's not kares. So here we're saying that if someone eats, according to Reb Shimon, he eats non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur, he's exempt from the Yom Kippur punishment because it was treif beforehand, and Yom Kippur doesn't add anything to it. the Rabbanan, as if it would be the Rabbanan, Ha'amri Yisachal Alissa, the Rabbanan argue on Reb Shimon and they say Yisachal Alissa. And since the Rabbanan say Yisachal Alissa, then they would say also that when the Kohen Gadol marries his sister, that's a widow, so it's a stackable prohibition. And just like he's not allowed to marry his sister, he's also not allowed to marry the widow, and that would be another prohibition. Gemara says that Afilu Tamer Rabbanan, it's not so. Really, you could say that even the Rabbanan would agree that if someone marries his sister, the Kohen Gadol marries his sister, that's a widow, that there's no added prohibition. Ki Amri Rabbanan Isachal Alissa, when did the Rabbanan say that prohibitions are stackable, like someone eats non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur? Hanimili Isachal Alissa Kal. I'm sorry, Isser Chamer Alissa Kal. That's only because the prohibition of Yom Kippur is much stricter than the prohibition of eating non-kosher meat. So originally it was only a small prohibition. It's not kosher. Now it's a Yom Kippur prohibition. It's much stricter. So that is stackable. Aval Isser Kalal Isser Chamer Leichayel. But if there's a small prohibition, not to marry a widow, and you have a big prohibition, not to marry a sister, so even the Rabbanan would say that that doesn't apply. That the bigger prohibition is so large that the little prohibition doesn't mean anything. Ikadamri, there are those that said this a little different. They said Hamani Rabbanan. They said that this is the opinion of the Rabbanan, that say that if Kohen Gadol marries his sister, that's a widow, that there's no prohibition of the widow in there.
That common?
Well, I don't know about it. It's not so common to have a high priest, and but high priests probably did have sisters, and if they married the sisters, maybe in the second base of Mikdash, when the high priest was paid, they could buy a way in.
The reason I ask is because in Inca society, that was required.
Oh yeah, they had to marry
in order to have offspring that was same line.
Did they have genetic?
Well, the thing is, all this stuff is written down by the Spanish chroniclers. So they might have had a reason to make up things.
Did the pharaohs have genetic? Because they also married their sisters.
It was common among these societies.
Right.
It's common today. Prohibited by law.
By common law, by American law. Yeah.
What
Happens though if someone marries a sister? What happens? What happened? The court comes in and they don't give you a marriage certificate. But it's not like you get arrested or something. After what? Oh.
I know that in Iceland it's a real problem that everyone's related. They have a database, dating database. So you don't pick your cousin.
Wow.
Yeah, everyone in Iceland is related.
We make cousins, third cousins.
Yeah, once it's more than a second cousin, I think they say it's fine. Okay. The benefits of intermarriage, not between Jews and non-Jews, but amongst the Jewish families. It's not intra-marriage, intermarriage. So the other version of this says Hamani Rabbanan hi Damri Isachal Alisser. It says that a one prohibition does fall on another prohibition. That's they're referring to Yom Kippur, where eating treif on Yom Kippur is a second prohibition of Yom Kippur besides for the treif. They call it nevela. When did the Rabbanan say that one prohibition falls on another prohibition? But that's only when the second prohibition is more strict than the first one, because it overlaps. Because it overlaps, it's like more broad, or if it's more stringent. Over here, it's kares. But if it's a lighter prohibition, for example, the Kohen Gadol marrying a widow, that's on a big prohibition of someone marrying his sister, like Chayil. That's not going to take effect. Reb Shimon, because if you would say Reb Shimon, of course it can't be Reb Shimon. But Reb Shimon says even a big prohibition doesn't go on a little prohibition. So for sure, a little prohibition can't go on top of a big prohibition. Mao de Tema, Gemara says no. I could have thought it would be even according to Reb Shimon, because I could have said that Reb Shimon accepts the fact that by Kayanim things are different. Could have thought Isser Kunashani, that because the rules of Kayanim are so strict, and I would have said like this. I would have said that even though everyone knows that you can't marry your sister, and that's such a big prohibition, but the rules of the Kayanim, that a Kayan Gadol can't marry a widow, is so strict, maybe that's going to go on top of that you can't marry the sister. Kamash Malan say that no, Reb Shimon wouldn't say that. Okay. Amalei Rav Papa la Abaya. We don't even need Rav Papa to say that. We don't even need Reb Shimon to say that. It's the Rabbanan that we're saying it. Okay. Rav Papa says to Abaya, Yisrael Habal Achais. Rav Papa is a student of Abaya. He's a student of Abaya and Rava. He says that if a regular Jewish man lives with his sister, Zaina Mashvala, that's a prohibition that would turn the sister into a Zaina, which means she would never be allowed to marry a Kohen after that. However, what about Chalala Mashvala, Ilay Mashvala? Does she become a Chalala as well? What's the issue? Mi Amrina and Kal V'chaimer Michai V'Lavan Havi Chalala. Kal V'chaimer Michai V'Lavan Havi Chalala. Michai V'Krisus like Kolshkein. If someone becomes a Chalala, when a woman lives with a man there's a negative prohibition on, she becomes a Chalala. So here she's becoming it's not just a negative prohibition, this is a chaybe krisis. For sure she'd become a halal. This is even much stricter. If a kayan lives with a widow, a kayan lives with a divorcee, she becomes a halala, that's just a negative prohibition. Here, if someone lives with his sister, for sure she should be a halala. Dilma, or maybe in halala Mr. Kuna. 1 second. It's not, the halala only comes from a Kohen prohibition. And this is not a Kohen prohibition, this is a regular prohibition. Okay, so the Gemara now says, Amarle, so Abaya responds to him, Ein halal el Mr. Kunim bilvad. It's only by a Kohen prohibition. Amar Rava adds into this. Minaha milsa damar Rabbanan ein halal el Mr. Kuna. Where do we know this concept that the rabbi said that a halal only comes from a Kohen prohibition, not a regular prohibition? The Tanya was starting in the Brisa, Lo yamer grusha b'kayin gadol v'tesik kal v'chemer b'kayin hedyet. It says like this. It says by the Kayin Hedyet that he can't marry a divorcee. The interesting thing is that the Kayin Gadol has another list, and it also says the Kayin Gadol can't marry a divorcee. So the Gemara is asking, why does it need to say that the Kayin Gadol can't marry a divorcee? Let it just say that the Kayin Hedyet, a regular Kayin, can't marry a divorcee. If a regular Kayin can't marry a divorcee, for sure a Kayin Gadol can't marry a divorcee. Why does it need to say it? Lama Nemra, so why does it say it? Shem shechaluka grusha mizayna v'chalala b'kayin hedyet kachaluka b'kayin Gadol. Well, just like it divides up the grusha, right? It says, and if you look at the verse, it says Isha zayna v'chalala, Isha zayna v'chalala, Isha let me pass me your Gemara.
Azulai. Isha zona.
Isha zayna v'chalala la yikacha, right? We just see on the side. Yeah. Isha zayna v'chalala la yikacha. And then it has another phrase. It says Isha grusha mi Isha la yikacha. He shouldn't marry a divorcee as well. So it starts off with zayna chalala, and then it says grusha. By the Kayin Gadol, it says Almana Grusha v'Chalala Zayna Seila Layikach. So it has the same list again by the Kayin Gadol. We're asking, why does it need to say Grusha by the Kayin Gadol if we already said it by the Kayin Hedyet? So in response to that, the Gemara is saying, why does it have to say Grusha, the divorcee, separate than the other three, Zayna Chalala, than the other two, Zayna v'Chalala? It like divides it up into two clauses. So why does it have to do that? So it says, you got it? Thank you. So it says, Just like if by a kayin hedyet there's the woman was a grusha as well as those other problem statuses, so she would get there would be a separate prohibition. So too by the kayin gadol, it's also separate. Okay. Kachaluka b'kayin gadol. Gemara says pshita migra gara. What do you think? That the kayin gadol is any worse than a kayin hedyet? If that's how it would work for a kayin hedyet, for sure it works like that for a kayin gadol. Ela kashem shechaluka grusham b'yisayin v'chalal b'kayin hedyet kachal mana chaluka migrusha v'chalal zayin b'kayin gadol. So too, what it means is that just like the grusha is an added prohibition for the kayin hedyet, that there would be if the woman had one status and she's also a grusha, that would be a separate prohibition. So too, by the kayin gadol, if she's a widow, that would add on a separate prohibition as well. Chalala, no, lama nemra. Why does it have to say chalala by the kayin gadol? Ein chalala misikuna. It's coming to teach me that the chalala only applies to a union that was prohibited for a kohen. Zaina lama nemra. Why does it have to repeat the zaina? Nemra kan zaina v'nemra la'alan zaina. It says over here zaina, and it says over there by a regular kohen makan zarechulen aflahalan zarechulen. Also over there, the children become a chalala, a chalal. Okay. Amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, Hilkach kayin haba lachaisei zaina mashvila chalal le mashvila. Therefore, if a kayin lives with his sister, going back to like the question, who asked this question originally? Rav Papa, I think. Rav Papa asked the question about Yisrael. Ravashi is saying, if a kayin lives with his sister, so he turns her into a zaina, and then chalala le mashvila, he doesn't make her into a chalala yet, because this was her first prohibition. But if he lives with her a second time, then she becomes a chalala. Come out is like this. You see, based on the fact that a chalala only comes from a woman that's prohibited to a kohen. So this woman, the sister of the kohen, she doesn't have a prohibition to a kohen. She's not allowed to marry a brother, of course, but she doesn't have a kohen prohibition. She can marry any kohen in the world, right? Comes along the brother and lives with her, so she becomes a zaina. Now that she's a zaina, now she has a prohibition to the kohen. But she's not a chalala yet, because chalala only comes from someone that's prohibited to marry a kohen and married a kohen. Right? The chalala is someone prohibited to the kohen and marries the kohen. So at the second relation, she becomes a chalala. The first relation, she only becomes a zaina. Because chalala is only from someone prohibited to marry the kohen and married the kohen. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda, kain gadol ba'almana lekeshtayim. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Now the kohen himself only loses the status temporarily while he's involved in it, but once he lets go, so he can go back and do his. No, the first time that the kohen's with his sister, she becomes a zaina, because she lived with someone that was prohibited to her. She becomes a zaina, but chalala is only a status from someone that lived with a kohen, someone that was prohibited to kohen that lived with a kohen. Now, even though she was prohibited to him, but it's only if it's a kohen prohibition. So now that she's a zaina, now she has a kohen prohibition. Now when she lives with him, then she becomes a chalala. Okay. it wouldn't matter. She can't eat truma anyway, but it would matter if a separate Kohen lives with her, if he gets malchus because of a zayna and the halala, or just a zayna. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Kohen Gadol Balmana Likishtayim, a Kohen Gadol that lives with the widow or marries a widow gets malchus twice. It says once in the Torah not to marry, and it says another not to profane your children. I'm sorry, over here it's talking about not to profane the woman. What about profaning the children? There should be a third one. It says he didn't complete the relation, so there was no possibility for conception. So you don't have that that prohibition. Masiv Rava has a question. My love, if someone marries a widow, that's also a divorcee, Kohen Gadol, right? So this lashes twice. My love, Shnei Shemes v'Sulay. It sounds like it's only twice. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it shouldn't be twice. It should be probably 4 times. Once because of Le'yechalal for each one, maybe, I don't know, or maybe only 3. It says Loi Shnei Shemes al Zeh v'Shnei Shemes al Zeh. Each one of those prohibitions gets 2. One is don't marry, and the other one is don't profane. The Gemara says 1 second. If there was a divorcee, that she was also a chalutza, right? You're not allowed to, Kohen Gadol can't marry a chalutza as well. Chalutza is when the brother died, and she, instead of marrying the brother-in-law, the deceased's brother, that's called yibam, she does chalitza. And chalitza means they separate, so it's a type of divorce. So Kohen Gadol, a kohen can't marry a divorcee or a chalutza. So here he married both. It says that he's only chayav malchus once. So why is it only once? It should be because of le'yechal as well. That's what Rabbi Yehuda added in. He's really only chayav once. He's chayav twice, but only for the grusha, not for the chalutza. So he has a le'yechal as well. That's what we're answering. Chalutza derabanan. You want to say that marrying a kohen marrying a chalutza is a derabanan? But Tanya, but it was taught in a brisa. Grusha ainly a grusha. I only know grusha chalutza minayin talmud lemer v'isha. We learn it from a pasuk that a kohen can't marry a chalutza. It says v'isha. That vav, extra vav, is coming to tell me also a chalutza. Where it says no midirabanan, it's really rabbinic. Kras machta ba'alma. The pasuk is only a support. Some say asmachta means just to help you remember that halacha exists. Okay, let's leave it over here. Rabta Amar Abaya.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, have a good day.